The 1850s was a period of continued growth for the railways, most prominent among which was the East Coast Main Line. 3 different companies were working on different sections of the line. The idea had been one of the last bankrolled by George Hudson before his railway empire collapsed. Despite the loss of his funding, the vast majority of the route had been completed by this time, and so the project continued unabated. In fact, by 1849, the only major breaks were across the Tyne and Tweed estuaries. For several years, passengers would have to disembark, cross by ferry, and then catch another train, since bridging the rivers proved a challenge. The Tyne proved a particular problem. The route went through the middle of Newcastle in order to service the city, but with Newcastle being a major port, the bridge would need to be high enough and with pillars space enough to allow sailing ships through. What's more, the bed of the Tyne is very soft and thick mud. In order to reach a stable base, Robert Stephenson had to design pillars that were 34 metres bottom to top, and wide enough to withstand currents and wind. The spans themselves were designed to the bowstring principle, in which an arch section is supported by a series of vertical buttresses in order to keep the track as rigid as possible. It was feared that too much vibration would destabilise the trains. The bridge was also designed to suspend a road bridge underneath. The bridge was opened by Queen Victoria in 1849, with the ceremony being followed by a large meal. According to some accounts, the Queen was upset about being handed the bill for the festivities, having not been consulted about it beforehand. She vowed never to look upon Newcastle again. For the rest of her life, whenever the royal train passed through the city, she would close her curtains until they'd passed. Only the Tweed now stood in the line's way. Here, Stephenson was busy building the Royal Border Bridge. The river ran through a steep valley, which required Stephenson to design one of the largest viaducts in the country. 659 metres long, sitting 34 metres above the water, with 28 arches. The construction took 3 years, used 227,000 cubic metres of stone, 2.5 million bricks, and 2,700 workers. The bridge was finally opened in 1850. From the new terminus at King's Cross, it was now possible to catch speedy direct trains to Peterborough, Doncaster, York, Newcastle and Edinburgh. Stephenson faced other challenges with bridge building. The Chester and Holyhead Railway required a bridge to be built linking Anglesey with the mainland. The Admiralty once more required the bridge to be built to a high level. As there was only one island to build off, the spans would have to be 140 metres long. Stephenson designed 2 long parallel tubes, walled by iron box sections, to maintain their rigidity, with the track running through the middle. A wooden roof was placed over the top to shield the iron from the weather. The bridge was the longest single-span iron bridge in the world at the time. Concerned about his own designs, Stephenson conducted extensive tests with scale models in order to ensure that the bridge would hold. Friendly rival Isambard Kingdom Brunel was there to watch its construction, and commented to him that if the bridge succeeded, all of his would be considered failures. But succeed it did. The bridge opened in 1850 and stayed in operation until some schoolchildren set fire to the roof in 1970. Brunel took inspiration from Stephenson for many of his own bridges. In 1849, his work on the Slough to Windsor branch line required a crossing of the Thames. He designed the Windsor Rail Bridge on the bowstring principle. The construction of the South Wales Railway allowed further innovation in Brunel's bridge designs. Where the line crossed the River Wye at Chepstow, he designed a tubular bridge, which may not look innovative by modern standards, but was revolutionary and widely praised at the time for its lightweight design, requiring a lot less material than Stephenson's almost solid-sided bridges. The main support came from 2 huge iron tubular sections supported on the pillars overhead. The main track was suspended below, with cross-bracing across the rods to keep flex to a minimum. Brunel's favourite bridge building material, however, was wood. At the Swansea Valley, he designed his largest wooden bridge, the Landau Viaduct, 536 metres long. Like most wooden bridges on the network, however, the bridge has since been rebuilt in various metals. But his most famous bridge from this era is the Royal Albert Bridge near Plymouth. Once more, the Admiralty set a minimum height and span width. Brunel expanded on the concept of the Chepstow Bridge and the Windsor Bridge and designed a double bowstring to sit across the pillars, cross-braced for added rigidity, with the main span suspended beneath, a solid construction as well as an aesthetically pleasing one. Another of Brunel's projects, the Campden Tunnel, became notable for the wrong reasons. A part of the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, the construction of the tunnel had been subcontracted to a company called Ackroyd's, owned by Robert Marchant. But Great Western were becoming exasperated by Ackroyd's slow progress. Their contract was cancelled, and Brunel was ordered to take direct charge of construction. Marchant took this badly, and he and his navvies barricaded themselves in around the site. Brunel responded by gathering navvies from elsewhere in the line to sort him out. Whether he was planning to take the place by force or simply make a show of strength is not clear. The local constables separated the two sides and read the riot act twice. Brunel's mob withdrew. Thinking that this was the end, the police went home. But both sides gathered reinforcements overnight and returned the next day before the police could stop them. The local magistrate spoke to Brunel, who agreed to help hold his navvies back. Nonetheless, mob skirmishes still broke out, resulting in broken bones on both sides, but no fatalities. Eventually, Marchant realised that Brunel's 2,000-strong mob outnumbered his 20 to 1. Seeing how hopeless his position was, he agreed to give himself up. At the same time, Great Western agreed to compensate his company better. Brunel would resign as engineer on this line a year later due to disagreements with the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Company, who wanted to build the line to standard gauge rather than the Brunel gauge. And that was far from the only disagreement he was having on the subject. He continued to insist that broad gauge and standard gauge could coexist, but increasing numbers were disagreeing, and this was putting a strain on Great Western's business. While other companies could expand by buying existing lines off smaller companies and just running their services down them, Great Western would have to completely rebuild the track before they could do so. What's more, since most of the network was standard gauge, that was where most of the innovation in train design was happening, so now the broad gauge could no longer even claim to have the performance advantage. With their business suffering, Great Western's board of directors tried to unseat Brunel. Nonetheless, he still had enough supporters to allow him to continue his schemes until 1859. Despite the drawback of the broad gauge, Brunel's railways were a great success. By the end of his life, he had created a railway empire as far north as Wolverhampton, as far east as London, and as far west as Truro and Neyland. The 1850s also saw the first uses of railways in warfare. In 1854, British troops in the Crimea built a new railway for the purposes of rapidly moving supplies and reinforcements from the main supply port at Balaclava to their siege lines outside Sevastopol. The rapid supply proved a godsend for the troops stuck in the trenches. Later, in the Indian Rebellion, the British were able to make use of several railways to speed troops up from Calcutta to the main trouble spots and help put down the rebels. But it was not until the American Civil War that the full potential of railways in warfare would be revealed. Back home, the network was continuing to grow. England was becoming much more interconnected. In Scotland, numerous companies were constructing a string of lines, extending the network as far north as Aberdeen and Inverness. In Ireland, too, the network was shaping up, with lines built connecting Dublin with Belfast to the north, Galway to the west, and Cork to the south. As the network grew, so too did the amount of time the public would spend sitting on trains each week. This led for increasing need for something to do other than staring out the window. There were newspapers, of course, but longer journeys demanded something more substantial. There was clearly a market for selling books to passengers. Bookstalls had begun to spring up outside stations almost as soon as the railways had got going, but these stalls varied wildly in quality and pricing. Often, the stall owner would be the only one at a particular station, and would take full advantage of their captive market. What's more, many of these stalls were selling books whose contents featured many subjects that the conservative Victorian public found particularly shocking to read. This was a bit of a problem, as many travellers had insufficient time to inspect the books properly at the station, and didn't really know what they were buying until they were too far away to do anything about it. Struggling to regulate these stalls, the railway companies decided that it would be much simpler if they could contract a single company to run stalls at their stations and liaise with them directly. In 1850, this contract was awarded to a man called William Henry Smith. Smith had opened his first W. H. Smith bookstall outside Euston in 1848, selling books, newspapers and snacks to travellers. In 1850, he opened new stalls in Birmingham and Manchester as well. Before long, every major station in England and Wales had one of his bookstalls outside. As the business grew, the lease on many of the stalls would run out. It was soon found to be more cost-effective to buy permanent properties on nearby high streets. The increased space meant that the company could expand into things like stationery and games. Thus it was that the railways created Britain's first chain shop. The railways had a revolutionary effect on literature in general. At the start of the 19th century, the country's major publishers were all concentrated in London, Oxford, Cambridge and Edinburgh, and that was where the vast majority of books published were sold. An author's work would travel very slowly. Now, with the ability to transport materials and skills faster, it became easier for publishers to set up facilities to manufacture and to distribute the finished product. For the first time, an author could have their books sold throughout the country within days of being published. The railways also provided a great source of inspiration for writers. Readers read tales of communities devastated by railways tearing through their towns, characters hopping onto trains to seek their fortune elsewhere, romances springing up between people who'd happened to sit in the same compartment, murder mysteries and spy thrillers that revolved heavily around the trains and their operation, tragic accidents on the railways, and ghosts haunting the sites afterwards, railways used as a jumping off point, carrying characters off to adventures in far-flung parts of the country, or even into magical lands, and tales of dashing heroes rescuing screaming damsels that some nefarious villain had tied to the tracks, escaping together by train, being pursued and getting into close-quarter fights in the compartments, or epic fights on top of the train, and finally leaping away to safety, always surviving somehow. Of course, reality can be as strange as fiction. One case in point is the Great Gold Robbery of 1855. The South Eastern Railway would often carry consignments of gold from businesses in London down to Folkestone en route to Paris. The safe carrying it would be sealed with 2 locks, and kept shut until it reached the far end, where agents in Paris had identical keys. The safe would be periodically weighed and checked for tampering. No one was allowed to possess both keys at the same time, and if one key was lost, the locks would be immediately changed. But some thieves managed to bribe the man responsible for changing the locks, who gave them copies of the keys. They also recruited a guard, who was disgruntled about having his pay cut. The guard signalled to them the next time the train was carrying gold. They put their bags, containing a quantity of lead, in the luggage coach. One of the thieves then hid there, and broke into the safe as the train was moving. He replaced the gold with the equivalent weight of lead, and reconstructed all the seals. The 2 of them then walked away with their bags, now containing 102 kilos of gold. The theft wasn't discovered until the safe was opened in Paris. Nonetheless, the conspirators were caught within 2 years and sentenced to hard labour. By 1859, almost every major city in the country was linked into the network, but transport in the inner cities was still largely horse-drawn. The 1860s would see the railways revolutionise inner city transport in many ways, but that is a subject for next time. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you would like to see more. There are a few things I need to sort out to make my next video as enjoyable as possible. For that reason it should be out by the end of February. I shall see you then. In the meantime, why not check out my website and my other videos on this channel. Bye!